on a family trip to the lake. I was boating with my husband, James, and my mother-in-law, Margaret, when something terrible happened. James suddenly stopped the boat, and he and Margaret took off my life jacket. They coldly told me, "Your time is up, we're done with you." Then, they pushed me into the lake and left me to drown. But I survived and managed to save myself. The next day, I surprised them with something they never expected. My name is Sarah Miller, and for a while, I thought I had a perfect life. I married James, my college boyfriend, the man I thought I'd spend forever with. I fell for him in my second year of college. He was charming, caring, and made me feel like the most important person in his life. After we graduated, we got married and settled in a cozy home near Lake Tahoe, California. Life seemed perfect. James was a Navy officer, a job he was proud of, and I admired him. His mother, Margaret, was kind and supportive before the wedding. She treated me like family and gave me advice on married life. I thought I was lucky to have such a nice mother-in-law. The first year of marriage was wonderful. James would come home, tell me about his day, and we'd enjoy weekends boating on the lake. Margaret would visit sometimes, and she seemed genuinely happy for us. But things started to change in the second year. Margaret began asking when I'd make her a grandmother. At first, I laughed it off, saying we'd start a family when the time was right. But soon, her comments became more frequent, and James started agreeing with her. They told me it was my duty to have children soon. I explained that it couldn't be rushed, but they wouldn't listen. One night, Margaret said, "You have 3 months, Sarah. If you're not pregnant by then, we'll have to reconsider your place in this family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. James sat silently, avoiding my gaze. I felt like my world was falling apart. I loved James and wanted to have children, but the pressure was too much. As I tried to understand what was happening, I noticed other changes. James became distant, no longer showing me affection. I thought it was just stress from his job, but something didn't feel right. Margaret, too, started acting cold. She would criticize everything, how I kept the house, the meals I made, even how I looked. It felt like I couldn't do anything right. One night, I confronted James. "What's happening to us?" I asked, tears in my eyes. "You've changed. You're not the man I married." James looked guilty but frustrated. "I'm under a lot of pressure, Sarah. Margaret is worried about the future, and I don't know how to handle it." His words didn't make me feel better, they just made me more uneasy. I started feeling alone in my own marriage, like my once happy home had turned into a prison. What I didn't know was that James was hiding a big secret. He was having an affair with Angela Harris, a wealthy businesswoman who was supporting his expensive lifestyle. Margaret knew about the affair and encouraged it, thinking Angela was a better match for James. Together, they were planning to get rid of me, but at the time, I didn't suspect anything. I kept hoping that our marriage could be fixed and that this was just a rough patch. Even when Margaret got crueler and James became colder, I tried to believe that love would make everything better. Then came the day that changed everything. James came home unusually cheerful and suggested a trip to the lake. "You've been so stressed," he said with a smile. "Let's go boating this weekend. Just the 3 of us, you, me, and Mom." I was surprised but cautiously hopeful. Maybe he was trying to fix things. I agreed, though something felt off. When the day came, Margaret was unexpectedly nice, even packing snacks for the trip. We drove to the lake, and for the first time in a while, they seemed almost happy. I wanted to believe it was real, but something felt forced. We rented a small boat, and James handed out life jackets. "Safety first," he said with a grin. I smiled back, trying to ignore the strange tension. As the boat drifted into the deeper water, I started to feel uneasy. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what was about to happen. Then James stopped the boat. "Sarah," he said calmly, "we need to talk." I felt a cold chill as the boat came to a stop in the middle of the lake. It wasn't from the water, it was from the look on his face. His expression was too calm, and Margaret was sitting next to him, arms crossed, smirking. "Sarah," James began, looking at me like I was a stranger, not the man I had married and loved. "We need to talk about your future, or rather, the lack of one." My heart raced as I tried to understand what he meant. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. Margaret laughed coldly, and her laugh made my stomach turn. "Oh, don't act surprised, Sarah. You must have noticed by now that you're not wanted in this family." My heart dropped. "What are you talking about? I've tried everything to make this work." James shrugged, looking completely calm, which made me even more uneasy. "It's not enough. Angela is willing to give me the life you never could. She's rich, supportive, and ready to start a family. You, Sarah, are disposable." Angela. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd heard James mention her, but I had no idea she was involved with him in this way. My mind spun, trying to piece everything together. Margaret leaned in, her voice dripping with hatred. "We've been patient, Sarah, but it's clear you're just wasting our time. It's better for everyone if you're out of the picture." Panic surged inside me. "Out of the picture?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "What does that mean?" James stood up, his face dark. "It means it's over for you." Before I could react, he grabbed me by the shoulders and yanked me to my feet. I tried to fight back, but Margaret joined in, ripping off my life jacket. I screamed and begged them to stop, but they just laughed, cold, heartless laughter that made me feel like I was fading away. "Goodbye, Sarah," Margaret sneered as she took the life jacket off me. "No, please," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "Please don't do this. I'll leave. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." But they didn't care. Together, they pushed me into the water. I hit the cold water with a splash, shivering instantly. I struggled to stay above the surface as I watched the boat drift farther away. James and Margaret stood at the edge, their figures outlined by the sun. They were laughing. "She can't swim," Margaret said with satisfaction. "It's over." My heart sank as I realized what they were thinking. They thought I would drown, that I wouldn't be able to make it to shore, but they had no idea how wrong they were. I loved swimming. It was one of the reasons I had always enjoyed boating. Despite the shock and fear, I forced myself to focus. I took deep breaths, calming my racing heart. Panicking would only make things worse. I started swimming, pushing through the water with everything I had. The shore seemed so far away, but I refused to give up. As I swam, I heard the sound of another boat. I looked and saw two people, man and woman, staring at me from a distance. They were too far to hear me, but they could see what had happened. One of them raised a phone, pointing it at James's boat, which was speeding away. I kept swimming, my muscles burning with the effort. I didn't know if I could make it to them, but I didn't have to. The other boat turned toward me, and within moments, strong hands pulled me out of the water. "Are you okay?" the man asked, his voice full of concern. I couldn't speak. I was gasping for air, shaking from the cold and shock. The woman wrapped a blanket around me as tears streamed down my face. "They tried to kill me," I managed to say through shaky breaths. "My husband and his mother, they threw me into the lake. They thought I'd drown." The man's face grew serious. "I saw everything," Andrew said, his voice steady. "We have it all on video. Don't worry, we'll make sure they pay for this." His words gave me a small flicker of hope in the darkness of the situation. They introduced themselves as Andrew and Emily Carter. Andrew was a lawyer, and Emily was his sister. They had been out on the lake when they witnessed everything that happened. "We're taking you to shore," Andrew said with determination. "You'll be safe, and I'll make sure they face the consequences for what they've done." As their boat sped toward land, I clutched the blanket tightly around my shoulders, my mind racing. My husband, the man I trusted most, had just tried to end my life. Margaret, who I once considered like a second mother, had helped him. Anger, heartbreak, and determination flooded through me. They thought they could break me, but I was still alive, and I wasn't going to let them win. When we reached the shore, Andrew and Emily helped me into their car and drove me to my parents' house. My parents were shocked when they saw me, drenched, trembling, and crying. I told them everything, how James and Margaret had betrayed me and tried to kill me on the boat. My father's face turned red with fury, while my mother hugged me tight, tears soaking my shoulder. "We'll fight this," my father said, his voice filled with anger. "They won't get away with this." Andrew nodded. "With the video evidence, we have a strong case. We'll make sure justice is done." That night, as I lay in bed, I kept replaying everything that had happened, the betrayal, the cold laughter, the look in their eyes. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape. But I also thought about Andrew and Emily, and the video they had. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. James and Margaret had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. Now it was my turn to fight back. The next morning, I woke up at my parents' house, still shaken but resolute. I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal, about the coldness in James's eyes and Margaret's cruel laughter. The memories haunted me, but I wasn't going to let them control me. They thought they had silenced me forever, but I was still here, and I was going to make them face the consequences. Andrew Carter arrived with his sister Emily that morning. They had spent the night reviewing the video evidence and making a plan. Andrew's confidence gave me strength. "Sarah," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "the video we have is solid. It clearly shows James and Margaret pushing you into the water, and their laughter afterward proves intent. This wasn't an accident, it was premeditated." Hearing him say it made my stomach twist, but I nodded. "What do we do next?" "We file charges right away," Andrew said. "We'll accuse them of attempted murder and conspiracy. With the evidence we have, the law is on our side." My parents were fully behind me. My father, protective as always, was furious. "They deserve to rot in prison for this," he muttered, clenching his fists. My mother squeezed my hand, whispering, "You're so strong, Sarah, we're with you." Later that day, we went to the police station to file the charges. Andrew came with us, his briefcase full of documents and the video on a USB drive. When we explained everything to the officers, they were shocked. The detective in charge of the case, Detective Collins, listened carefully and promised to act fast. "This video will make all the difference," Detective Collins said. We'll start by bringing them in for questioning. For the first time since the attack, I felt a sense of power returning. James and Margaret had tried to treat me like I was nothing, but they had underestimated me. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to stand up for myself. The next few days were a blur. The police arrested James and Margaret at their home. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Collins told me they were stunned. They never thought I'd survive, let alone fight back. I could only imagine their faces when they saw the evidence. The case moved quickly. Andrew worked tirelessly, making sure every detail was in place. He explained the legal process to me step by step, ensuring I felt informed and empowered. We were charging them with attempted murder, and Andrew was confident we had a strong case. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I was nervous but determined. As I entered the courtroom, I saw James and Margaret sitting at the defendant's table. Their expressions were a mix of shock and defiance. It was clear they hadn't expected to see me alive, let alone ready to testify against them. Andrew began by showing the video in court. As the footage played, the room went silent. Hearing the sound of James and Margaret laughing while they threw me overboard sent chills through everyone. The prosecutor pointed out how their actions were planned and cruel. James's lawyer tried to say it was all a misunderstanding, claiming they panicked and thought I was already dead when they left, but the video and my testimony proved otherwise. The jury could see the truth. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and said from my heart, I want to tell you about the years of emotional abuse, the ultimatum they gave me, and how I trusted them until the moment they tried to kill me. James was the man I thought I'd spend my life with, and Margaret was like a second mother to me, but they betrayed me in the worst way. They tried to end my life because I didn't fit into their plans anymore, but I'm still here, and I'm here to make sure they face the consequences. The courtroom went quiet after I finished. I could see the jury exchanging looks, and their faces were serious. James and Margaret avoided looking at me, their confidence fading away. Andrew's closing argument was strong. He emphasized how cruel and calculated their actions were and how they thought they could get away with it. He made it clear that they were caught red-handed. As the trial went on, it became clear that the evidence was all in my favor. The video, the testimonies from Andrew and Emily, and my own story left no doubt. I could see James and Margaret getting more desperate. Finally, the jury decided, guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced them to life in prison without parole for trying to kill me. I felt a huge wave of relief. Justice had been served. They tried to destroy me, but they had failed. They would spend their lives paying for what they did. When I left the courtroom, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also victory. They had taken so much from me, but they hadn't taken my will to fight. I was still standing, and now I was ready to rebuild my life. After the trial, I felt relieved, like I could finally breathe. James and Margaret were found guilty, and their life sentences were proof of how terrible their actions were. But even though the weight was lifted, the scars they left would stay with me. Outside the courtroom, my parents, Andrew, and Emily were there to support me. They hugged me tightly, showing me I wasn't alone. Andrew smiled and said, "You did it, Sarah. You stood up for yourself, and now they can never hurt you again." I nodded, tears in my eyes. I couldn't have done it without all of you. You saved my life, on that boat and in every way. In the weeks that followed, I focused on healing. I stayed with my parents to process everything. The betrayal still hurt, but I refused to let it control me. I started seeing a counselor to help me work through the trauma, and little by little, I felt stronger. Andrew and Emily stayed in touch, always checking on me. One day, Andrew came to visit with some news. "I thought you should know," he said. "James and Margaret tried to appeal their sentence, but the court rejected it. They'll serve their full time." I felt a sense of justice. "Good," I said. "They deserve to pay for what they did." As the months went on, I began to rebuild my life. I returned to my hobbies, especially boating. At first, it was hard. I had to face my fears, but I reminded myself that the lake wasn't the enemy. It was a place I loved, and I wasn't going to let James and Margaret take that from me. Slowly, I began to enjoy it again. I also started exploring new opportunities. I went back to school to study counseling.